the more money you have to make your movie, the less I will forgive. As the budget goes up, what I'm willing to forgive goes down. If you've got millions and millions of dollars for the best gear and talent, I will not look past your film's shortcomings. On the other side of things, if you've got no money, well, I can forgive quite a lot. Welcome to Exploitation Reviews, and me, Rob, and today I am joined by Dan from TYTD Reviews, and we are going to take a look at a film only the most forgiving people can love, Nail Gun Massacre.
Forgiving is right, man. Yeesh. And thanks so much for having me aboard on this one. And you picked a hell of a movie here, as Nail Gun Massacre is known in many cult and exploitation circles as being one of those movies that you either get and pretty much instantly fall in love with, or you end up wondering what those people were smoking, given just how tragically ludicrous and ludicrously tragic the whole endeavour is.
Yeah, Dan doesn't like to show his face on the internet. Totally understandable. The internet is a weird place. But I also don't want to show too much of the movie, so I'll think of something. Dan, get us started with a synopsis.
As far as plots go, there honestly isn't too much to say. The film opens with a full-on rape scene. A bold choice, given that most films that deal with sensitive subjects like sexual assault tend to at least give some build-up to the rape scene, where we actually get to feel invested in the characters and their motivations. Not here, though. Instead, we plunge headfirst into what can only be described as a frying pan to the side of the head, before the film seemingly gets bored and, according to the original script at least, we then crossfade to 5 months later, where we set our sights on an old run-down shack in the middle of the woods. There's a woman hanging laundry and her husband's getting increasingly irate that his wife can't hear him ranting about how he doesn't have an ironed shirt ready to go for his day's activities. It's here that we're introduced to our killer for the movie, the motorcycle-helmeted nail gun killer. Their shtick could be best summed up as they appear out of nowhere, sneak up on their unsuspecting victim, make a quip or quips about something that's going on in the scene to their victim, then they shoot that person full of nails before vanishing off to cause more mayhem elsewhere. In this case, they nail the husband while he's still in his vest, and then when the wife and kid head back to the shack to see what's going on, they find the guy dead on the floor and flee into the woods. At which point we then crossfade again, and we appear to jump forward in time again, this time by another month, and we're introduced to Mark, who's seemingly in the middle of playing doctors and nurses with a young woman who's in desperate need of an organ donation. Before we get to that, however, Mark explains that him and his best bro Brad have agreed to head into the woods to chop wood, so they'll have to put the operation on ice for a bit. Even after strong persuasion, Mark can't be swayed, and both him and Brad head out to near where the husband was murdered a month prior to go chop some logs. On the way there, they explain that it's been a month since the killings, and it's also mentioned in passing that the mother and child who fled into the woods were also nail-gunned to death. But it's all kind of shrugged off because those logs aren't going to hack themselves, bro. Anyway, before they even really start doing anything, Brad has to go take a leak, so he heads off to find a tree. Little do the pair know, the nail gunner is tracking them, tackling Brad while he's midstream, causing him to literally piss on them and leading to him being lights outed pretty sharpish. Mark comes to find out what all the commotion is about, and he pretty much instantly meets the same fate as well. We then jump again 2 days into the future, honestly this thing plays around with time more than Doctor Who at this point, where we meet a sheriff who, while on patrol, spots Mark and Brad's pickup truck and notices that it's been there for at least a couple of days. Somewhat concerned, he decides it's probably worth running the plates, and a short time later they find the bodies. While this is going on, we also have a brief segment in a mom and pop store where, in between idle chatter with the cashier, a young couple get word that a shack in the woods is on offer as a place to live rent-free, with the only condition being that they need to fix it up if they intend to live there, something they're more than happy to do. And what follows is basically about an hour of repetition on the above two themes. The nail gunner travels around mainly killing targeted victims while quipping their way through scenes, and we get extended sequences of the young couple talking about how they're going to fix the shack up, intercut with the sheriff and the town's doctor discussing the murders and trying to figure out their motive. The only clue they have is that most of the victims are contractors. In a frankly astounding hour and 25 minutes of border-maddening cinema, will the sheriff catch the killer? Will the couple manage to turn their shack into the home of their dreams? And why does the cashier look so distressed throughout her scene? I'd say someone should do a welfare check on her, but this was 37 years ago, so I suppose it doesn't matter anymore. Anyway, all this and more will be answered if you check out Nailgun Massacre.
Okay, that's enough out of Dan as far as plot goes. Let's talk some highlights, and since I already interrupted, I'll go first. Well, you've probably figured it out already, but this is not a good movie. But it is a watchable movie, and that's something. It has this endearing, goofy tone. Part of this, no doubt, is because this is inept filmmaking of the highest order. But even beyond those kinds of shortcomings, which Dan will address in more detail later, the film is legitimately funny. Does this film know what it is? I think so. I hope so. No, it does. It has to know what it is. I mean, the tagline on the VHS box was cheaper than a chainsaw. Yeah, that's pretty clever. And beyond the fun, goofy tone, this is an exploitation film through and through. We got plenty of blood, plenty of nudity, and more than plenty bloody nudity. In your heart of hearts, can you really ask for more? What did you think, Dan?
So, right out of the gate, it's got to be said, this film is an absolute train wreck of a production. The script is repetitive, there's no solid act structure, the pacing is stuck in a single gear for most of the runtime, there's no nuance, little to no character development, it's rammed to the gills with padding, to the extent that they have to pad out some of the padded scenes in order to add context to make the padded scenes actually make sense. This honestly is a 30 to 40 minute film stretched to nearly double its natural runtime out of the necessity to try and secure distribution. The opening and closing 10 minutes are about as close to plot development that we get, as we get locked into an hour and 5 minute cycle of person goes to place, meets the nailgun killer, gets killed, and then usually there's a quip either before or immediately after. And the beat goes on, and the beat goes on, and the beat goes on. Part of that is budgetary, as the original script did have actual plot points and a point, but just as filming was getting underway, the financiers drastically slashed the budget, forcing the 80-page script to be slimmed down to a mere 25 pages. The resulting cuts meant the film could never be realised as a straight horror movie, so the writer and director, Terry Lofton, decided to do the tale as old as time approach and rebrand the film as a black comedy. Rewriting sections of the script to play up the comedy elements and asking the cast to ham it up just a little bit on the deliveries to try and persuade audiences that in fact it was always intended to be a comedy. A move known today in the industry as pulling a Tommy Wiseau. Because of the cuts, the production was hit across the board, but Lofton took on responsibility for most of the film's key aspects pretty much out of necessity. Given that this was his first ever attempt at making a movie, the results are a bit of a mixed bag. The direction, given the circumstances, isn't awful. I've seen worse efforts on higher budgets. It's not great, but Lofton at least seems to have been able to tie all of the elements of a production together into a workable package. And even if it isn't pretty, the film can't be accused of being incoherent. That being said, direction of the cast is a total shambles, with most of the cast being bolted to the spot during the takes, presumably too terrified to do anything other than just stand there, say their lines, and if they have to do an action, to do it bloody carefully, as the budget probably didn't allow for extra takes or more film. The cine is mixed to poor, with most shots lacking any real kind of focal point, sequences feeling very much made up on the day, with low to no effort when it came to lighting the thing. Scenes are either plastered in floodlit ice white light or they're not lit at all, garnering questionable results. It's not a pretty film by any stretch of the imagination, and the handful of shots that do look relatively decent are few and far between and feel more like an accident than anything else. The performances are dreadful, some of the hokiest deliveries I've seen in a long time. Generally the readings feel like the cast are using cue cards for most of the runtime, and I am 99% convinced they improvised some of the scenes with a vague thread as to what was needed to be conveyed, because if what is said was written down, Lofton must be the most inane writer I've ever encountered in my 6 years of covering films like this. Even the physical performances fail to live up to any real level of quality, with our helmeted killer arguably giving the most animated performance, which even then doesn't really work because 99% of the other cast members are so sedentary it makes the killer feel out of place in this world. It's like if Leatherface suddenly rocked up on Newhart. Given all that I've said about this movie, you'd think I'd be well within my right to tell you to avoid this thing like the plague, but surprisingly, I not only wholeheartedly recommend checking it out, I'd actively encourage you to do it with friends. The resulting carnage is perfect fodder to sink a six-pack and just bask in its total and utter lack of form and purpose. The script's awful, but from the resulting cuts you get some of the most surreal, cringy and awkward set pieces that I've seen in a good while. The direction and editing are stilted, but that results in a film that's sincerely trying to get off the ground while unintentionally being hilarious in the process. The effects in this thing are actually good. I mean, they're not studio grade, but they're streets above most of the low-budget offerings from the day, and I was genuinely quite impressed.
I was impressed too, but like a hot date on the hot hood of a Trans Am, it does have some shortcomings. And since I interrupted Dan again, I'll start us off. Make no mistake, this movie is bad, but I do think it earns our forgiveness. I'm not really the type of person to watch a bad movie to make fun of it. I can laugh at some inept filmmaking as well as everyone else, but that's not really what I'm into. And to be clear, this is inept filmmaking. Look at this guy. He's such a bad actor, he can't convincingly walk. I didn't even know it was possible to walk bad. But beyond the bad walking and bad filmmaking in general, there is something else here too. Passion for a project. It is not easy to make a movie, and with all the problems the production had on this film, it's a small miracle it got made at all. You don't make a movie like this unless you really want to, and you surround yourself with people who share that passion. And you can see that passion here in the Nail Gun Massacre. And maybe it's that passion that does make this watchable. There are plenty of bad movies that I consider to be unwatchable. Earlier Dan mentioned Tommy Wiseau, and that's a good example. I cannot get through The Room because it breaks the one rule of filmmaking. It's boring. Your film can be anything, except that. Nail Gun Massacre does not break this rule. It's watchable, it's fun, it's never boring, and that's why I like it. That's why I can recommend it. Final thoughts, Dan?
This isn't a good movie, and if cheesy awkwardness isn't your bag, I'd suggest steering well clear of it. In my opinion, the decent gore shots and the handful of genuinely good and solid moments from a technical and scripted standpoint aren't worth the slog of sitting through this dross. But, if like me you enjoy cult, strange and B-movie cinema, this is everything you could want in a low no-budget slasher and more. A surreally awkward experience that swings violently between being unintentionally hilarious and incredibly dry. With some friends and a few beers, this is prime material for a late-night riff session, and when paired with something a bit more grounded, I'm thinking maybe something like The Exterminator or Terrorize, you could have the makings of a pretty damn decent slasher double feature on your hands. I'd say check it out if you can, just be aware that this is not your standard cult slasher fodder. It's so much less than that, and so much more unique for it in my opinion. Man, thank you so much for having me on. I've totally enjoyed taking this one apart with you, and I hope we get to do it again sometime in the future. As for me, you can find me at TYTD Reviews on YouTube. We have new reviews weekly where we aim to take a look at cult and B-movie cinema, taking them apart and analysing what made them tick and how, with a little TLC, they could have been better than they ended up. You can find us on Twitter under TYTD Reviews as well, so please do be sure to drop by and say hi. And thanks again. All the best.
Thank you for joining me this week. And yes, everyone, be sure to go over to Dan's TYTD Reviews and check out his work. Lots of cool stuff over there. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe. That's free. That's way cheaper than a chainsaw.